Welcome back. You're watching our continuing coverage here from Davos 2023. I'm Shereen Bhan, and joining me now is the CEO of the NITI Aayog, Mr. Parameswaran Iyer. Mr. Iyer, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to Davos.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me start by asking you about the conversations that you intend having both with policymakers from around the globe as well as business leaders. It's been a year of resilience for India. There's a lot of expectation around whether we can build on this. Who are you going to be meeting here in Davos, and what's the story going to be?
Well, there are a number of business leaders we're going to meet. We're also going to meet with multinational bank leaders. And, we've got a big Indian delegation here. There are 4 ministers who are going to be here. And, of course, the backbone is our business executives, our business leaders, captains of industry. So we're looking really, to continue, particularly during the G20 presidency as well. And it's all about how India continues to be the one bright spot in the global economy with the headwinds. And I think that it's partly to sort of engage with international business and, continue to make the point that India is an attractive destination for business. So, India is open.
India is open. That's going to be the message that you want foreign investors to take away from this. But speaking specifically about areas of opportunity that you want more FDI to come into and, opportunities that you want to leverage on. There's been a plethora of PLI schemes that the government has announced already, 13 or plus. The NITI Aayog, of course, has been at the forefront of working with the government on putting these PLI schemes together. Specifically on manufacturing, the expectation now is that this could be the opportunity to seize on the potential, especially as global supply chains look at moving out of China or China plus one. On that front specifically, is there a message that you're sending out, that the government intends to send out here?
I think there's a clear message there. And, if we're talking of PLI, it's the whole PLI ecosystem, not the PLI itself. If you look at all the structural reforms which have taken place over the last 6 or 7 years, all the way from the insolvency and banking code, the goods and services tax, you look at the PLI itself, and if you look at asset monetization pipeline, the national infrastructure pipeline. So I think it all sends out a message. But coming back, and they all are sort of part of this ecosystem. But if you look at the PLI itself, it's about strategic sectors. It's about manufacturing. It's about obviously leading to exports, bringing in global players, and and really putting manufacturing in very specific areas on the map. So we would like global investors to come in. The system is ready there. We've got the skills. We have got the market, and it's a great opportunity for us to establish ourselves as Global Value Chains Inc.
Mm-hmm. On this aspiration of positioning ourselves as the Global Value Chains Inc., to quote you specifically, is there also a growing consideration that perhaps to benefit of this opportunity that the sort of move out of China opens up, is perhaps a recalibration of our position on allowing joint ventures that also have Chinese investments? Do you believe that that could be up for consideration?
Look, I think, that's something which the government will have to decide. But the fact is that we're open for business. Given the fact that we have maintained a growth of 6.8 to 7%. The last quarter, they're predicting 7%. So jobs have increased. So I think in the face of all these global headwinds, recently the Prime Minister had an interaction with economists in the NITI Aayog just a couple of days ago. And I think there was acknowledgement all around, obviously, that, India has somehow managed to remain resilient. And I think we are very optimistic about growth. If you look at exports as well, despite the import bill going up, partly due to the oil bill as well. But I think that we are very ambitious, and I think the Commerce Minister is talking about a 2 trillion export target by 2030. So I think things are in place. The PLI is a huge trigger to bring in world-class manufacturing, value added, and and make it home and also export.
Mm-hmm. Some of the other measures that the government is likely to take, especially when we talk about the ease of living, and here in Davos, of course, the cost of living is one of the big global risks, and of course we've had to deal with that back home as well. On that front, from a social security perspective, from a social net perspective, we've just seen some changes being done as far as the food program is concerned, for instance. What more do you believe is the need of the hour as of today on that front?
Exactly. Now, I think the food security, program which we put in place, particularly during COVID, that made a huge difference. At one point, there was more than 1 crore hot meals being served during that program. I think we've got a very strong social security net in India, and that's actually encouraged people, to go out and spend and consume. Unlike other countries where they don't have such a strong social security net, so they're saving much more. Whereas here, consumption is increasing. But on the social security aspect, in addition to the food part, now we've got the National Food Security Act, which is increasing the number of food grains people are eligible for. I think going forward, that's one part which will always be important because we need growth with inclusion. But if you look at the number of social programs which the country has run over the last 8 years, whether it's toilets for women, whether it's housing, whether it's roads, I think whether it's bank accounts, Jan Dhan, 40 million bank accounts. So I think what is really important here is that this program of basic services at scale, that's something which in the first 6-7 years of this government, whether it's rural or urban, there's a sense of security that no one is left behind. And I think building on that, together with growth with inclusions is something which the Prime Minister is talking about. And in the end, the plan is in 25 years to become a developed country in 2047. So I think the building blocks have been set in place. And now it's a matter of getting down to further implementation and getting the states on board. That's a very important agenda, particularly for NITI. An instrument for enhancing government effectiveness, Government of India and the states. So every state has got a critical role to play in that $5 trillion or $10 trillion target. And I think building the capacity and working together with states is going to be very, very important to get them all on the same sort of national page.
And that's a very important point that you made, in this collaborative federalism that we want to move forward with. What will be the imperatives? What are the priorities, for instance, the NITI is hoping to work on to ensure that this is much more effective?
Sure. The Prime Minister's speech, 15th August in 2022, he made a very important point. He said, India grows when the states grow, and in the spirit of competitive collaborative federalism. So that's a very, very important mandate for NITI. And so we have started something called the State Support Mission, where we work with all states and we work with them to help them develop their own GDP target, an inclusive GDP target. What's the roadmap for that? And what's that institution which will drive that in the state? So we've already had 4 or 5 states which have created their own state NITI. UP has done it, Karnataka has done it, Assam has done it, Maharashtra has done it. So we're working with them. But then we need to build the capacity, help them to build the capacity of that institution to have the right skills, which again comes back to Skill India. And how do you develop the skills and how do you share that knowledge across states? That's really important because you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And every state will have its own strategy. In fact, every district, the Prime Minister is talking about one district, one product. So every district will have its own unique development trajectory. Every state will have its own. So we are working with states and we're helping them to help the districts as well.
That is internal collaboration. But let's talk about external collaboration because that really is the theme here at the World Economic Forum of nurturing global collaboration in a fragmented world. And the role that India is going to play and will have to play, especially in the context of the G20 as well, to get different sides and different voices to move forward in a unified fashion. How do you see that playing itself out?
I think, the Prime Minister's global standing is making a huge difference. Whether it's Ukraine or whether it's the whole geopolitical situation, I think that personal standing makes a huge difference. He has the ability to influence and convene. So that itself is making a difference. But India's role is being increasingly recognized globally. And, whether it's in partnership with the West, and, we play a role of, it's a situational thing. The Prime Minister comes in, whether it's the Ukraine, this is not a time, for war. So I think that he carries a lot of weight globally. But in the G20 presidency, there are 4 or 5 very important themes which India will sort of try to stress. The first is obviously climate, environment and lifestyle for the environment, something the Prime Minister announced at COP26 in Glasgow. How can sustainable lifestyles actually help to improve climate? And then, of course, we have got the energy transition, going to be critical. And, of course, climate financing is going to be on the table particularly from the developed countries. What are they putting on the table after all the commitments made in Paris? And then we have got women-led development, the whole reform of the multinational institutions, accelerating the SDGs, and critically, digital economy and data for development. I mean, India's digital story is phenomenal. As you know, 40% UPI, almost 5,000 crores transactions last year. So the whole digital story, India stack, this is something where India can help the world. You know, I was looking at some numbers recently. There are apparently 4 billion people in the world without any digital identity. There are 2 billion people without bank accounts. And, 130 countries don't do digital transactions. So there are huge lessons of India for the world, whether it's SDG progress or whether it's digital stories to the world. So India can play a major role in convening, but also in helping other countries.
Yes, I think the digital story is well articulated, well documented as well, and that is going to certainly be something that I would imagine that India showcases. But you talked about the life mission as well, and that's what I want to focus a little bit more on. What are the next steps that you see, the tangible next steps that we can expect as far as the execution roadmap is concerned?
Sure. So, when the Prime Minister and the Secretary General of the UN, they jointly launched this Life globally on 20th of October in Kevadia in India. The Secretary General was visiting India then. This is a very major, it's the other side of the climate debate, if you want to think of it like that. On the one side, you've got the science, the policy, and the NDCs. And here you've got a bottom-up approach. How can people contribute to climate? I mean, there's evidence from the from UNEP that people's actions can actually reduce emissions by almost 20%. So they can make a big difference. For the Prime Minister who's leading this as a global movement, it's about how individuals and communities can contribute to the climate and environment. And there are 3 aspects to it. One is if you nudge people into adopting climate-friendly behavior, whether it's water conservation or, riding bicycles instead of, using big SUVs, simple things like that, using cloth instead of plastic. The Prime Minister's focus on simple actions, sort of walking the talk. That can nudge demand. So industry in turn and corporates can respond to that. If people demand climate-friendly products, they will have to respond. So then the supply comes in. And finally, the policy angle. So there are 3 aspects to it which are being rolled out. Individually, India, our traditions, our culture has always been climate-friendly. So that is going on and that's being rolled out. But globally as well, if you remember, there were 10 heads of state who endorsed the Prime Minister's Life movement at Kevadia. So now Life is being rolled out globally as well. And June 5th, World Environment Day, we plan to have a large international conference where action research will be rewarded.
Okay, well, we look forward to seeing more play out on the 5th of June. But as far as NITI itself is concerned, there seems to be a little bit of a change as far as priorities are concerned, less industry focused and more sort of social sector focused. That's the impression. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. But is that true? Is that accurate?
Actually, not at all. So we continue with all our cutting edge work because first and foremost, we are a national think tank, innovation, disruption, whether it's on electric mobility or energy or the PLI scheme or asset monetization, which we're trying to take. That focus continues.
Is there disappointment on the asset monetization front?
Well, last year, against a target of 80,000, we did 90,000 crores. And this year it's moving along. The finance minister has taken a couple of meetings. And we're hoping to have sort of more progress as the year rolls out. So that focus on disruption, innovation, technology, digital, everything which NITI has always done, that continues. But there's also a focus on the states. I think that's quite important. Not so much social. Social, of course, is important, but there's agriculture, health, education. We've got Vinod Paul with us, who has been leading, the whole COVID campaign as well. But I think the whole idea is to take some of the asset monetization and move it down to the states as well. Because, they need to raise resources. The whole focus on public-private partnerships is very much there. We have a very strong team in NITI, so nothing has changed.
Okay. You talked about PLI, you also talked about electric mobility, and I know that is something that the NITI has been championing for the last several years now. We're almost at 2024, which is when the sun sets on the current FAME policy. Do you believe that there is need for FAME to continue in its current avatar or perhaps in a different version? Or do you believe that it's time to do away with subsidies?
Well, there's a lot of demand coming from the industry. Again, this is something which we need to work out with the Department of Heavy Industries and, of course, the Finance Ministry. So that discussion will go on and we'll see how that plays out.
Everyone sending in their budget wish lists, and I'm sure NITI's put together one and then sent it in as well. What would you like to see?
Look, many things, obviously. Continued push on the agricultural front. The PLI is obviously continuing. I'm sure there'll be a focus on growth. Again, fiscal consolidation, I think that's quite important. Keeping the budget deficit, trying to bring it down to that level. And obviously, jobs are very, very important. So MSMEs, needless to say. All these were also discussed at the Chief Secretary's conference in some detail, where the overarching theme was Viksit Bharat, reaching the last mile. So growth with inclusion. And let's see what happens in the budget.
What was the feedback from the economists when they met the Prime Minister?
It was very positive. It was a very, very frank discussion. It went on for about 90 minutes. They also, and the Prime Minister summed it up brilliantly. You had a lot of divergent views, but his ability to...
Divergence over what?
Not divergent. I mean, they went all the way from, how do you deal with other countries, all the way to the goods and services tax, reforms in general, jobs, Manrega. There were a lot of discussion. But the ability of the Prime Minister to pull it all together and summarize it in a few succinct sort of, sentences, that was amazing.
Parameswaran Iyer, it's always a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here in Davos and taking us through the conversations that the Indian government intends to have here, as well as the focus areas and priorities. Always a pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure to be here.
I have to say that quote of yours of India's aspiration being the global value chain ink is certainly going to be something that we are going to be using. But thanks very much for joining us. We are going to take a break here and return with live coverage from Davos 2023. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a minute with more.